Another example, I'm sitting in a room with my brother one day. We were having a totally, I don't even remember what the conversation was, not about anything profound. And it was quiet for a minute, and then I just blurted out the name Jedediah. And it was kind of a random thing. He was like, what did you say that for? And I said, I don't know. It just came into my mind, and I wanted to say it. And that was that. The next day, my best friend came back from his vacation, and he hands me this African statue, and he says, this is Jedediah. And he had no, I mean, it shocked me. My jaw dropped. I was astonished. And so we had never had any conversation about this. It was beyond anything that could be known or understood. He had purchased it right at the time when I said the word. So there were hundreds of these, thousands of these experiences, maybe even, most of which I can't even recall, but that which were constantly pushing me into a connection with this higher reality. Okay? And it pushed me into the study of mysticism. When I got to be in my 16, 17, I started to become heavily interested in yoga, mysticism, meditation, anything and everything that I could find to understand how the best way to connect to this reality was. Of course, when I started studying yoga, immediately I was floored that the main symbol of the awakening of the Kundalini is this exact experience that I had as a child of the serpents coiling up the spine, flying out of the crown point of the head at the enlightenment moment. And also I saw the number 9 everywhere. And I knew that I had seen the truth in my youth. So I pursued the study much deeper. I began to practice heavily meditation, yoga, studying on the religions. Eventually, that led me to the study of Islamic mysticism, Sufism. I became really fascinated by the story of the Prophet Muhammad, by its relationship and its clear relationship to what you might call archetypal shamanism, the practices of receiving revelation, power songs, sacred names, and being able to use them to ascend. And where do you ascend to? You ascend through the levels of heaven. And the very end of the levels of heaven is the divine lot tree, the world tree. And beyond this tree, there is nothing that can be known. But they say of the Prophet that his eye never wavered when he ascended past this point. He saw perfectly clearly, straight. There was no crookedness there, as the Quran says. Okay. As I began to study the Sufism, I found that through the intonation of these divine names, I was able to achieve exalted states of meditation, which before were very almost inaccessible and very difficult for me to achieve through other practices. So I became really interested in that, reciting various names to absorb the various divine attributes, whether it's immortal love, the eternal, the giver, any of these names of God, the self-subsistent, all of these names. The idea was that through the intonation of these names, you could achieve these qualities of God. And as I deepened into this, and I was very seriously into it to the point that I even took an Arabic name, and the name that I chose was Idris, which is a prophet mentioned in the Quran. He's said to be the second prophet after Adam. The Quran barely mentions him, to say that he was a noble prophet. It was said that he knew many languages, that he had the understanding of language, and that God raised him to a high station. And because it was a fairly uncommon name, I chose that name, and I just liked the sound of it, which is really why I chose it. So as I got further into that study, I became increasingly interested in what's called the most great name of God, talked about throughout the Islamic and Sufi tradition. And the idea is that somewhere within the Quran was written the most great name of God, and if that name was understood, it would contain all the other names. So to be able to properly intonate that name would be the source of everything, would be the ultimate. And so I began heavily to study on that and to pursue it. I knew it was connected to the number 9. I knew it was connected to this symbol. Okay. Around, I guess in 2001, of course, 9/11 occurred. And I was amazed at how this Islamic tradition came to the forefront of the world media attention right as I happened to be immersed in it. Though I had no, and still do have no interest in politics. And I'm not promoting or demoting any group. But I was amazed by that, and so I began to become even more deeply involved and to learn more about it. At that time, one day, meanwhile, these experiences and synchronicities had continued to occur. One day, it really reached a crescendo. I was walking down the street. It was a beautiful day outside, and I was walking down the street with no particular aim. I just decided to leave my house and just walk around in the city. As I'm walking around, I see this woman in the most crazy outfit you can imagine, with the most crazy makeup you can imagine, harassing various people on the street, all of whom were trying to get around her and get away from her, basically. And she was saying the same thing to everybody. She was saying, "It's crazy what's going on in the world, isn't it?" So she came to me, and I stopped. And for whatever reason, though I've bypassed plenty of crazy people on the street before, I decided to stop and listen to what she had to say. For about almost an hour, she talked to me, standing there on the street, jumping from one subject to another without a whole lot of coherence. But I tried to listen to her because I thought she needed someone to listen to her. As I continued to listen, finally, after about an hour, I realized I needed to be getting on my way. And I told her I was very glad, to meet her. And she said, and she stopped, and she became completely lucid for a moment. And she looked me directly in my eyes, and she said, I'm really glad I met you here today, too. Because in the Bible it says, you should be careful how you treat a stranger, because it may be an angel of your Lord in disguise. And at the time I smiled and just thanked her, and it was kind of shocking to me, but I just let it go by, and I said I thanked her, and I continued on my way. But as I was walking, the weather was the most unbelievable day outside, and I had this most unbelievable sense of divine presence come over me, and it stayed with me for the rest of the day. Very shortly after that, one day I was standing in my house, and this was in 2001, and I looked at the clock, and it was 9/11, and I just said, "Oh, it's 9/11." After that, pretty much on a slow day, I would say 6 or 7 times. On some days, 10, 11, 12 times, maybe more. I looked at the clock at 11 minutes after the hour every time I looked at the clock. And it wouldn't be when I was looking for it. It would always be when I was in the middle of something or just asked somebody what time is it. I started to tell people about it. It was so overwhelming to me, I couldn't, it was like I was somehow rhythmically connected to some kind of cycle. And everyone laughed. Most people said, whatever. I remember I was telling my uncle about it. We were working together doing construction. Told him about it one morning. He laughed at me. Later on in the afternoon, I'm up on a lift. I don't have any time-telling device, and I just asked him, "Hey, what time is it?" He pulled out his phone. It was 4:11. But still, no one really believed. So that continued for years. I continued with my practice of the recitation of the names. I devoted even over a whole summer where I would sleep maybe 3-4 hours a night, maybe less, doing all-night practices of the prayers, intonations, and beginning to experience higher states of consciousness. And as I did that, these synchronicities increased, and I deepened on my belief in them.